Hi folks. Have you had any experiences since you've been working remotely, if you've been working remotely, where a communication or a message has just gone awry and been completely misinterpreted or misunderstood? This is not uncommon during these high stress and high pressure times that we're in, but also just due to the fact that we are missing some important context clues that we're used to when we work side by side or over the office wall from each other. I'm Dr. Erika Garms, CEO of WorkingSmarts, and I help organizations become more high performing and healthy at the same time. Please hit subscribe and the notification bell if you'd like to know whenever I post a new video, which is weekly. Now back to that heads up for you. So normally when we're side by side, rubbing elbows so to speak, in the office or in geo-co-located, we knowingly or unknowingly pick up on context clues. So when somebody's passing our cube or our office, we notice their body language, we notice the look on their faces. When we hear them across the hall talking to somebody else, maybe laughing, or we pick up on what their mood is probably like based on what we hear. So there are all sorts of ways that we pick up on the context of a message when we're around each other physically. Now subtract all that and we are contextless. So especially if it's a day where you haven't seen or spoken to a coworker with a video call, then that day you're particularly contextless. If that happens to also be a day where you get a message from that person, it's going to be harder to interpret the tone that was intended and to hear the message as neutrally as possible so that you're not reading into it. Keep in mind that during this tough time that we're in, this weird time that we're in workplaces, we are experiencing having our needs, our human needs, aggravated or threatened. One example is our need for certainty. Certainly, you could agree that our need for certainty is not being met when we don't know what next week will bring. We don't know how long the pandemic will last. We don't know what work will look like in 3 months, in 6 months, in a year. We don't know what school will look like. So much uncertainty. When we have all those layers of uncertainty surrounding us and kind of infiltrating us throughout each day in many ways, then we've really got an aggravated certainty need. So that puts us on edge. That fires up the negativity bias, and perhaps you've heard of that before. The negativity bias comes from, it's a natural human bias, and it comes from the fact that in order to survive, our brains are constructed to take in and store negative information differently than it takes in and stores neutral or positive information and memories. Okay, so think about the brain as a tangled web of neural connections. We have billions of those in there, and we have double the number of those connections that support negative information as compared with positive information. Remember why? Because we want to remember that when we're 3, we put our hands on the stove and it burned, and we don't like that. We don't want to do that again. Okay, and in this case now, that core basic human need to survive is really raw and really fired up. I like to call it really alert because of all the uncertainty and all the threats to survival that are all around us. Whether we interpret that consciously as a threat to survival or not, the body reacts to that. Back to messages. If you know that our need for certainty and for safety and security are being aggravated, we've got a super alert negativity bias, then what does this tell you about messaging? Number 1, don't shoot from the hip. When you're giving messages, think about it before you fire it off, before you submit or send, because every word counts. And remember that it's coming through the filter of those unmet needs and those negativity biases in your staff or in your coworkers. So no shooting from hips, okay? Second thing is, Watch your language in the sense that after you've drafted a message, even if it's a sentence or two, draft it, then look back at it and try to spot any particular words or phrases that might unclear or leave something open to the imagination. Because if you leave something open to the imagination in these kinds of times, people will fill it in with something that is likely more negative than reality is. One other thing that kicks in especially strongly right now is, again, related to our core needs to be safe and belong. We want to be part of the in-group, and there's this concept of in-group, out-group that sociologists and anthropologists and neuroscientists and behavioral scientists of all types like to study, and I love to read about. And in-group, out-group is, at the biological level, it's a life or death issue. Now, in your everyday work life, if we are getting messages that alert us to the fact that we might not be in the in-group in some way, or that we might be on the outside of a message, or on the outside of a decision, or an alliance, or a club at work, then that's deeply threatening. That's deeply threatening, and that will exaggerate any other anxieties or frustrations that were already there. So bottom line, leaders, managers, anybody that's sending messages, and coworkers, if you're sending messages to each other, this is just as important for you. Take a moment to think through what you're saying, write it, draft it, look back over it to make sure that you're eliminating any gaps or words that could be at all inflammatory or negative or fear-inspiring. Remember, if you leave a void in understanding or information, it'll get filled, and you don't want to let it fill by default, because chances are good that it'll turn negative. It'll further aggravate people's anxieties, frustrations, cynicism, fear, etc. So you want to fill that void intentionally and proactively. It'll serve you and your entire team well. If you like this video, please hit like and remember to subscribe so you don't miss any in the future. Thanks.